From the studios of Staten Island Community Television, you're watching In the Bleachers, the TV show for the world's most passionate sports fans. Hello, everyone. I'm the official team psychiatrist for the New York Mets, also known as Jamie Hickson.
And I am probably one of the few Jet fans out there, also known as Eric Rosen.
We're very, very happy that you could join us this evening, ladies and gentlemen. Before we start, I just wanted to give a special word of thanks to our new friend Roman DeSimone, who's on the other side of the glass. He's actually double dipping tonight because not only is he on the other side of the glass, but he's also taking care of things in his office. So, quick word of thanks to Roman for doing such a good job helping us sign on to the show once again.
It was really nice meeting him.
Yep. He's only been here a couple of months, but one thing that I've learned about Roman is he has become such a pro, and he's so brilliant, too, when it comes to doing shows. He's been doing audio, he's been directing, he's been really helping out with a lot of the shows that have been going on here, both in-house and independently. And he's been a real breath of fresh air for the station.
Well, I wish you all the best of luck in your new job here, Roman, as all the people CTV do.
Speaking of breath of fresh air, a real breath of fresh air took place over the weekend, which I like to call a 4-day weekend, because not only did they play the first preseason game of the month, which was the Hall of Fame game, but the actual Hall of Fame induction ceremonies took place this past Saturday in Ohio.
The game itself took place on Thursday, and it's no longer Fawcett Stadium. They actually renamed it Bob Benson Stadium, and they renovated the whole place. It really looks nice, and they're really trying to develop that entire complex in Canton, Ohio, which is the home of the immortals of football. And in the game itself, the Cowboys did win 20-18, and Rico Gaithers, a Baylor basketball player, got his licks in and made some really nice catches, including 3 catches for 59 yards, including a 17-yard catch early in the third period and a 26-yard touchdown play. So, and he's got great length. As you know, basketball players really make for good NFL players. Jimmy Graham, especially when he came out of college basketball, good as a tight end. Antonio Gates, another great college basketball player turned pro. So right there, I think Rico's got a good future and will probably be on the main roster come 2017 for sure. And
I have a really interesting story to tell you about another guy who really did well, not just in basketball, but in football as well. And he was a terrific athlete. And you're going to be really surprised when you hear the name that I'm about to drop. But that's a story for a little bit later.
And in this game, you know, I have to give it up to Blaine Gabbert. Yes, we all know he's a backup. Yes, his career stats are not glaring. But on one drive run, he makes really 7 good completions down the middle to players. Granted, it's second and third string guys who most likely are never going to be the stars. But we did see some ability on the field. And we know he's going to end up being the backup to Carson Palmer, most likely, when the season begins. Overall, the Cowboys did win 2018. It was, a good game to see. These games don't really serve for having good winning or losing records. They serve mainly for coaches to evaluate their players, whether or not they're going to be on their roster come September. It's for the guys who are in the second and third tier who have no idea if they're going to make the team, make the practice squad, or basically have to find another job. So right there, that's what these preseason games are all about. And they are fun. They're not for the top-tier guys mostly, because those guys will play here and there just to get their sea legs in, but they want to save them for when it really counts, the regular season. Now, as for Saturday itself, the biggest ceremony that every player aspires to get to, the Hall of Fame.
And that's the Hall of Fame induction ceremonies itself. And they had quite a class that they put into the Hall of Fame.
LaDainian Tomlinson, one of probably the best running backs to ever play, had one of the most memorable speeches probably of the evening. His call for everybody to stand together for unity, to be together. Football is a microcosm of America. All races, religions, creeds, living, playing, competing side by side. Let's not choose to be against one another. Let's choose to be for one another.
I couldn't have said it better myself. I mean, especially at this time where there has been more of a strained relationship between the public and the police, he probably put it about as eloquently and as truthfully and as matter-of-factly as any other individual could have.
Well, he also wanted for all Americans who may have been divided by so many issues, maybe to come together and be united, and caring and loving for one another. As Ellen DeGeneres always says, love and care for one another.
Mm-hmm.
That's the kind of message that LaDainian was trying to bring in this message, that everybody lift each other up, do not put each other down.
It's really interesting that you mention the words that LaDainian spoke about in his speech about bringing the races together, because Kenny Easley, who also got inducted in this year's class, Kenny Easley played 7 years for the Seahawks, and there have been a lot of people who have been touting for that guy, who was a tremendous safety in his time. In fact, he was the Defensive Player of the Year at one point.
24 years to get in.
And there was a time that he actually severed his ties with the Seahawks because, for one, they wound up trading him away after his 7th year in the league, and two, he had a real falling out with management at that time. But after Paul Allen bought the Seahawks, he made it a point to try and establish contact with Kenny Easley, and Kenny was really grateful to Paul Allen for that. And think about this. Kenny Easley is now one of, I think, 4 Seahawks. Well, one of 9 Seahawks that are now in the Hall of Fame. It's him. There's also Steve Largent and a couple of other guys who only had cups of coffee with the Seahawks, but also Dave Craig, too. Dave Craig was the Seahawks starting quarterback for 12 out of his 19 NFL seasons.
And if you look at what...
and also the late Cortez Kennedy.
In 1984, one of his best seasons, he had a career-high 10 interceptions easily. That season alone right there.
That was the year that he was the Defensive Player of the Year. And another thing that really soured Easley on the end of his tenure with the Seahawks was the time that he suffered an injury. He suffered an ankle injury, and he blamed the training staff for him overdosing on painkillers. And as it turned out, those painkillers wound up giving him kidney failure. And he never forgave the Seahawks or their training staff for that. And it was painfully obvious that he still wanted to keep his past years with the Seahawks in the past, because even though he wound up mentioning Cortez Kennedy and Dave Craig and also so many others, it was obvious that he only wanted to talk about what was going on now. And for the record, he wound up getting inducted as part of the Veterans Committee of the Hall of Fame.
Which is good. About time the guy got his due into the annals of history.
Mm-hmm.
So look at what
and one thing that he has in common with a current Hall of Famer, Bruce Smith, they grew up in the same area in Virginia together.
That's awesome.
And there are a lot of great players that came out of that area of Virginia. There was Smith. There was Plaxico Burress, too, who came from Virginia Beach. A guy who I really do not want to have to mention, but Michael Vick also grew up in Newport News, Virginia, and the state of Virginia has produced so many terrific NFL players in the past. Kenny Easley was one of the many guys that wound up passing through the NFL that came from Virginia.
By the way, with Tomlinson's career stats, he had over 13,684 rushing yards, 145 scores in his career. He had 18 straight games with a rushing TD, which set a league mark. The 06 Walter Payton Man of the Year, and he met his idol at the age of 12, Emmitt Smith, at his camp. And he talked about how his mother first couldn't afford to send him to that camp, but then saved the money and told him, son, I have the money to send you to camp. And he bumped into him at training camp. It was one of the best moments of his life. And now he gets to be in the same place that Emmitt Smith is. And his name, Tomlinson, gets to endure in Canton forever.
And it's funny that you mention the area in Texas where he grew up, because he revealed the origin of how the Tomlinson family got their surname. Turns out his third grandfather was a slave, and his name was adopted by his slave master. And as it turns out, the area in Texas where they grew up, there's a place called Tomlinson Hill. And as it turns out, Tomlinson Hill was named after not only his grandfather's slave, but Tomlinson's third grandfather himself.
It was a very moving speech, and his career was incredible, and he really deserves it. What about Kurt Warner, quarterback of the team of the St. Louis Rams and the Arizona Cardinals? These were two fledgling franchises that he lifted up.
Mm-hmm.
In 1999, the year he was supposed to be the backup to Trent Green has that awful injury, that knee injury that he tore up in a preseason game. So what happens? Dick Vermeil, the coach of the St. Louis Rams, moves Kurt Warner up to the top spot, and what does he do? He gets 41 touchdowns, wins the league MVP that year, takes the Rams to the Super Bowl, defeats the Titans 23-16 in the 1-yard game, and he becomes the MVP, has over 341 yards in that game with 3 touchdowns, a part of the greatest show on turf. In fact, he took the Rams to 2 Super Bowl appearances in 3 years with the franchise.
If you were to look up the phrase "paying dues" in the dictionary, you would see a picture of Kurt Warner's mug in there. Listen to how he got to where he arrived this past Saturday night. Grew up in Iowa, was a second or third string quarterback on his high school team in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Played at the University of Northern Iowa. Never got drafted. The Packers basically gave him a token deal to be on their practice squad. And then he does 3 years of arena ball, 1 year in NFL Europe, and finally he gets his chance to play for the Rams, and he winds up having maybe 3 of the best seasons that any quarterback could ever have in that span. 2 Super Bowl appearances and 1 championship.
And it was close to being 2 Super Bowls in 3 years had not been for that Vinatieri game-winning field goal in Super Bowl 36 against the Patriots. And then he goes to the Arizona Cardinals, and he helps lift that franchise up, takes them to a Super Bowl appearance, Super Bowl 43, and they were within an earshot of winning their first franchise Super Bowl. And what happens? Of course, San Antonio Holmes gets the game-winning touchdown with both his tootsies in the end zone. Mm-hmm. It was one of the craziest games, on top of the fact that, unfortunately, Warner was picked off for 99 yards by Harrison. Mm-hmm. And then, after that, that was pretty much it for him. Years later, he ends up retiring. He goes to the NFL Network. He's an analyst there now. He does the Sunday morning, which is really nice. I like his broadcasting skills.
Mm-hmm. Lost in this whole thing in his career is that sandwiched around his time with the Rams and the Cardinals, he spent a year with the Giants, and he would eventually be replaced by Eli Manning, who some are calling a future Hall of Famer.
And then the next player to get inducted, Jason Taylor.
I just saw his induction speech on YouTube because the NFL, they have their own YouTube page, and each of the induction speeches were featured on the NFL's YouTube page. I just saw Jason Taylor's speech right there. He had some of the most classy and heartfelt things to say about his single mother. He never knew his father, grew up basically in poverty in Pittsburgh, and basically when he was a teenager, he was doing some work in his mom's yard, and he wound up being discovered by the coach at his local high school. And the coach at his local high school wound up grooming him to be one of the top players in the Pittsburgh area, winds up earning a scholarship to the University of Akron, and then he gets drafted by the Dolphins. And one of the first guys that he wound up looking up to wound up being his teammate, and it just so happened to be a fellow Pittsburgh guy, Dan Marino.
He was a 3rd-round pick out of Akron University. That's the crazy 3rd-round draft pick out of Akron. He spent 15 years in the NFL, most of his time with the Miami Dolphins. Had a cup of coffee with both the Redskins and the Jets.
Yeah.
Had 139.5 career sacks, which is in the top 5 all time. Was the 2006 NFL Defensive Player of the Year. Had 11 passes defensed, 2 interceptions returned for TDs, 10 forced fumbles, and 2 fumble recoveries, 62 tackles Yeah.
Yep.
That was the year, and 13 half. That was the year of his '06 Defensive Player of the Year. And on top of all that, the Man of the Year award he won in '07. I'm so happy for him. And then the next person to look at, too, Terrell Davis.
Yeah.
7 years in the league, all of them with the Denver Broncos, went to 2 Super Bowl appearances and won both of them.
Yeah, I thought for sure that he didn't really have a chance to get inducted because after his 2,000-yard season and his second straight Super Bowl, he mangled both of his knees, and he wound up playing a total of 17 games in 3 years. And I thought for sure that he would not even get a sniff of the Hall of Fame unless he were to go to Canton as a visitor. But as it turns out, he was inducted only for 2 reasons. One, he was a great clutch player in the playoffs, and 2, because of the 4 years that he spent, the first 4 years that he spent with the Broncos, especially his 2,000-yard season. He wound up accumulating over 6,000 yards in 4 years playing for the Broncos.
Yeah, the '98 season, he became the 4th player ever in NFL history to have over 2,000 yards.
Mm-hmm.
That was the year, of course, he had a spectacular 3 rushing touchdown performance in Super Bowl 32 when they defeated the Green Bay Packers. He was a 6th-round pick that came out of the University of Georgia, which is unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
In the year 1998, he had 21 rushing touchdowns in the league, leading that year.
A lot of people don't know this, but before his Bronco days, Terrell Davis almost did not live long enough to even make it to high school because when he started playing football, he talked about his father who helped raise, I think it was 6 children, all boys, while growing up in San Diego.
And migraine issues that he had,
Mm-hmm.
that he was suffering through.
And unfortunately, his father passed away when he was 12 years old, and that really, really set him back quite a bit. He wound up hanging out with a bad crowd, so much so that he talked about how he saw the end of a gun pointed right at his face. And that was what made him turn his life around. He went back to school. He went back to playing football. And then he, after he graduated, he became one of the last players that the late George Allen wound up coaching over at Long Beach State. Unfortunately, he never got to play for George Allen because he wound up getting redshirted. And not even a year after being redshirted, George Allen wound up passing away. So he spent 1 year playing at Long Beach State. Then they canceled the football program. And then he spent his last 3 years of college ball playing for the University of Georgia. He didn't even see the field that much playing for Georgia because, for one, he was always hurt. And 2, he wound up backing up Garrison Hurst his first year at Georgia and his second year as well. And as it turns out, Mike Shanahan, wound up seeing something really, really interesting in him. And as it turns out, it was the last 2 games of his college career at Georgia where he had consecutive 100-yard games where Shanahan wound up really seeing something in him, and he gave him a chance as a 6th-round pick, and he wound up having 4 terrific seasons before he tore up both of his knees.
And then the second kicker ever to be inducted, Morton, the great Dane Anderson. The other person ever do it as a kicker, John Stenerud.
Jan Stenerud. I remember seeing Jan Stenerud for so many years playing for the Packers and the Vikings, and before that he started his career with the Chiefs. They are now the only place kickers to be in the Hall of Fame. The only punter that's in the Hall of Fame, Ray Guy of the Raiders. But Morton Anderson lasted a quarter century playing in the NFL.
Mostly with the Saints.
With the Saints and the Falcons.
Giants, Chiefs, Vikings.
Played briefly for the Giants and also for the Chiefs and the Vikings. And he told the funniest story of how he first tried out for football when he came to the States from Denmark all those years ago. He talked about how all of the guys on the line were basically bending over in formation, and all he kept staring at was the guys' butts. And then he wound up seeing the football that they used to play in the game. He knew right then and there that he was really in for a lesson on how to play American football, but somehow he kept at it, and he was really blessed to have a good host family when he lived in Indiana for a year. And then after that, he wound up going to Michigan State and then had a long, fruitful career for so many different teams.
Over 2,554 points altogether, 565 Witcher field goals, 849 extra points. He's the all-time leader for both the Falcons and the Saints, and a 5-time All-Pro. And member the 1990s All-Decade team. And he retired in 2004 with 40 field goals of 50 yards or longer, which is an NFL mark. So right there, one of the greatest foots in NFL history. And then finally, from the front office ownership wing, we have Jerry Jones. And I know some people are going to say, why did he get in? But you have to give him this. When he bought the team, bought the team for $54 million, a franchise like the Cowboys that was losing $1 million each month. He saved this franchise from ruin. And he almost had second thoughts about buying this team.
Yeah.
But he decided to go with his gut, and look what he did. He turned them from a team that was losing $1 million a month into a $4.2 billion enterprise, which is considered the most profitable franchise according to Forbes magazine. And what he did, he brought a multi-million-dollar business to the league. He really, with his TV contracts, like acquiring Fox to do NFC games, sponsorship deals, as we've seen, labor issues that he's overseen as well. So right there.
And, of course, there's the fact that he produced 3 championship teams. And also, he made the one trade that put the Cowboys on the road to winning those 3 titles in 4 years, and that was the Herschel Walker trade.
Yep.
And the stipulation in that trade was if neither of the 3 players that he acquired were on the roster the following season, the Vikings owed him draft picks. And who did one of those draft picks turn into? Emmitt Smith, who is now in the Hall of Fame.
It's just amazing what he's done for the league, and I know some people will dispute that he's an amazing person, but he is. I'm sorry, I actually admire the fortitude and strength that the guy has had and what he's done for the team, and how he's turned the Cowboys into a very profitable, awesome franchise, and what he's done for the league itself. He's revolutionized the game to where it is today, and I'm very happy for him that he got selected into the Hall of Fame. And he had his players actually the day after they won against Arizona. They had a day off on Friday. They practiced on Saturday, and they even went to the Hall of Fame to check out some of the museum items just a few hours before the ceremony. And they had him sit all the way in the back, and he talked about how he was thankful to Tony Romo, who's now going to be with the NFL and CBS with Jim Nantz coming this fall. And he actually was in the simulating broadcasting with Jim Nantz at the Hall of Fame game on Thursday. He also had he thanked Jason Witten for what he did. He's thanked so many people in his career, and he even thanked Herschel Walker, because if it wasn't for Herschel Walker, we wouldn't have had the likes of Emmitt Smith.
Do you know that ESPN did a 30 for 30 short about that trade? They even had a great title for it. They called it the Great Trade Robbery. And yes, when you think about it, the Cowboys kind of did commit a robbery there.
Of the Vikings.
It was basically a 4-for-1 trade that the Cowboys and Vikings wound up orchestrating. Herschel Walker from the Cowboys to the Vikings for 4 players, neither of whom wound up making the roster the following season, and they were turned into draft picks.
Well, like I said, that's why he's a strategic businessman. And yes, there are some people who accuse Jerry Jones of being a bit of a control freak with the fact that he's the owner, the general manager of the team, and executive vice.
Let's face facts. Jerry Jones is a control freak, because if not, then why do you think Jason Garrett still has a job? Jason Garrett is basically the guy's yes man.
Well, as long
he knows better than to try and defy Mr. Jones's authority.
It's also the fact that Jason Garrett, his head was on a swivel going into last year. If it wasn't for the fact that, unfortunately, a lot of events took place. One being Tony Romo's collarbone injury. The fact that Kellen Moore got injured even before that. So it gave Dak Prescott the ability to go from number 3 to the number 1 quarterback position, and he had a terrific season where he only threw, 4 interceptions and 28 touchdown passes. And then you had Ezekiel Elliott, who had over 1,600 yards, being the 4th selection out of Ohio State in the 2016 draft, along with 15 rushing touchdowns. Those two factors, and one of the best offensive lines in football, and the fact they won the NFC East division right there gave Garrett yet another year at the helm. So things could change if we don't see a repeat performance of the Cowboys in 2017 like we saw in 2016. Jason Garrett's head could be on a swivel this year. That's a thing. You never know what Jason Garrett.
Let's see what happens with Ezekiel Elliott first before anything else.
Because not doing anything.
Well, if Ezekiel Elliott is going to get a free pass by the league, then the Cowboys will be in good shape. Let's put it that way. This, again, brings up an infuriating thing for me. Ezekiel Elliott has major problems with the law, one of which involves domestic abuse, yet he's still able to keep his job. Yet Colin Kaepernick's worst offense is exercising his right to free speech, and he can't even find a job? So basically what the NFL is saying, we're okay with you having run-ins with the law, yet try not to pop off at the mouth too much when it comes to talking about our country.
The thing is, the NFL it's a business-oriented league. It's a $13 billion a year business. And I know that sucks. Believe me, at times it sucks that people think more with their wallets than with their hearts. But the fact is, they think with their wallets. They think of dollar signs. And if they see there's one player that agitates so many people, it's not financially viable to basically hire or sign a guy like that. It's a risk to a lot of these owners who invested billions of dollars into their franchise, and they're not going to let one person ruin that empire for them. And
this leads to this. Just over the weekend, Jay Cutler decided to come out of retirement so he could sign a one-year deal with the Dolphins.
For $10 million.
Jay Cutler is going to get $10 million for 1 year, in spite of the fact that he is
incentives.
3 games under 500 for his 11-year career. The same Jay Cutler, who has been nothing more than a sourpuss towards teammates, the same Jay Cutler who has made a bad habit of pointing the finger at teammates, yet Colin Kaepernick, who, for all intents and purposes, is not a bad guy, cannot get an NFL job. You're going to tell me that Jay Cutler, a guy who's 3 games under 500 and who has more than done his fair share of costing teams games by committing stupid turnovers at the wrong time, which is ironic considering he hasn't, the one time that he had more interceptions than touchdowns was, I think, his first year in Chicago. Other than that, he always had a positive turnover to interception ratio.
Well, you look at 2015, the fact is that you know who the head coach of the Miami Dolphins is? Adam Gase. And back in 2015, when Jay Cutler was the starting quarterback for the Chicago Bears, Adam Gase was his offensive coordinator. And he had one of his best seasons. He had 21 touchdowns to 11 interceptions.
You know how many times Jay Cutler has been over 500 in a season?
Yards in that season. And the fact is, he knows Adam Gase's system, too.
He could have Vince Lombardi as his head coach, and not even he can turn Jay Cutler's life and career around.
Well,
Jay Cutler, not Colin Kaepernick, a guy who I feel is a better player than Jay Cutler.
Well, 72 touchdowns, 30 interceptions, and a pass rating of about 88.9.
Colin Kaepernick had 6 years in the NFL. I mean, did he have his mechanical issues near the end of his time in San Francisco? Yes. But Jay Cutler threw 146 picks in 11 seasons. If Colin Kaepernick were given the opportunity to play another 5 seasons, I don't think that he would reach 146 picks in 11 seasons. At least Colin Kaepernick could make plays with his feet.
But
That's
also,
what made him such a dangerous player on the field every single
but when
time.
you make comments about Fidel Castro and wear a Fidel Castro T-shirt in Miami, where a majority of them are from Cuba, expatriates of Cuba who have lived through the Castro regime, that is basically a thorn in the heart for these people. That's basically rubbing salt in the wounds to a lot of the Cuban population in Miami.
Let's
So
face
is a
facts.
public
You don't want
relations
to antagonize the Cuban population in South Florida. They're proud people, and they risked their lives to try and get to the Miami area so they can just have at least a small taste of what freedom is like. They could not even spell freedom when they were in Cuba. Now they finally have that luxury living in the Florida area. But look at what the Ravens did. Stephen Biscotti, who's the Ravens owner, went so far as to ask the advice of Ray Lewis, a brilliant linebacker in his day, who also was caught up in a double murder scandal in Atlanta, lied about the whole thing, and got at least 2 guys put in jail because they lied for him. Ray Lewis, Ray Lewis, who wound up lying about a double murder scandal, yet Colin Kaepernick's biggest crime was exercising his First Amendment right. And what happens? The Ravens decide to back off at the last minute because they don't want to hurt their brand.
Well, you have
And it's
to
not just Ray Lewis either. Does the name Ray Rice ring a bell?
Yes, there are people.
And as
who
it
have been
turns
given
out,
contracts.
the NFL wound up getting roasted. They're still getting roasted to this day because of how they handled the Ray Rice situation.
And yes, there are players like Greg Hardy who got contracts from Dallas. And yes, there are players like Michael Vick who have been given second chances too, who have had questionable moral past. But at the same time, unfortunately, there is, to some people, there is a double standard. When you have guys who have morally reprehensible pasts given second chances to get contracts, while a guy like Colin Kaepernick, who just peacefully exercised his First Amendment rights, doesn't get a contract. That's from one perspective. The other perspective is, which is the majority, from what I understand, are fans who feel as though that Colin Kaepernick, in their mind, in their hearts and souls, feel as though that when he puts his knee down during the national anthem, it's disrespectful to our country and the troops, even though there are some troops that speak their minds online, say it doesn't offend or bother me in any way, but the majority. So you got to go with the majority. These owners, again, have invested millions, if not billions of dollars into their franchise, and they're not going to take the risk of them losing money because they are going to take a risk like putting Colin Kaepernick. Even though there have been people with questionable past given second chances, still, when you have a lot of people who have a lot of anger towards Colin for doing that, it's not financially viable to them. It's messed up, but unfortunately, this is the $13.4 billion reality that is the NFL.
There was this article. Actually, there have been 2 articles about this whole situation. One is in the Blaze. Do you know that there are football fans that are accusing the Dolphins of racism because they chose Jay Cutler, a white quarterback, over Colin Kaepernick?
I
a kid who is the
agree with that
parent, the kid who is the product, I should say, of a mixed marriage. Black husband, white wife. That's one thing.
It's all finance, Jamie. I
And-
know people
and
want to bring
all-
it back
and
to
not
race.
only that-
It's finance. It's money.
There
It's
was
a
also
business.
the issue of trying to appease a predominantly white fan base. And it's not just the white fan base, it's also the 31 out of 32 white owners in the NFL. The same owners who have a rather, to put it mildly, conservative view on how things should be run in this country. You're going to tell me that you would rather have a guy who either knocked out his fiance or slammed his girlfriend onto a sofa full of guns or beat his kid with a weapon. Yeah. You would rather have a guy like either one of those than someone who exercised his First Amendment rights?
Or Joe Mixon. How about the rookie for the Cincinnati Bengals?
If that's what these owners are thinking, then this only smacks of the hypocrisy and the atrocity that these NFL owners have in this game.
When you have
Quite frankly, these men should be ashamed of themselves. And it's times like this that I'm sorry to be a football fan, because quite frankly, it's gotten to the point where getting in trouble just for exercising our First Amendment rights has become more of a taboo than domestic violence or covering up a murder.
Well, also, some people even say, Colin Kaepernick may have had taken his team to the Super Bowl. Not me. He did take the Baltimore. He took the San Francisco 49ers to the Super Bowl. They lost, unfortunately, to the Baltimore Ravens, including on a last-second play. But on top of all that, look at the quarterbacks that actually have been signed ahead of Colin Kaepernick, and this is going to make you really puke your guts out. Mark Sanchez to the Bears.
Brother.
Dan Orlovsky by the Rams. Fitzpatrick to the Buccaneers. Matt Barkley by the 49ers. Josh McCown, unfortunately with the Jets, who has a 2-20 record the last 3 years. Mike Glennon, given a 3-year, $45 million deal to be with the Bears. Case Keenum to be with the Vikings, 9-15 career record. Matt McGloin to be the backup to Wentz in Philadelphia. Blaine Gabbert, but I'll be honest, Blaine could be probably the best of the 10.
Oh, please. Blaine Gabbert is garbage. Have you seen Blaine Gabbert play? You just look at his video from his Jaguars days, and that should give you an idea.
I think with the right, you got to understand too where this Gabbert's career. He's had to deal with 7 different offensive coordinators in as many years. When you have to deal from one offense coordinator to another, and you have to learn a different playbook,
and neither one of them had a clue how to fix that kid's mechanics.
Yeah, but still, when you have to learn from one playbook to another, that messes with your consistency. And it doesn't matter if it's just an individual player or an entire team. That really hurts consistency, and that's what teams need. They need consistency in order to get the system right, in order to get things moving in the right direction.
I'll tell you right now, Colin Kaepernick has more talent by himself than all 5 to 10 of those kids combined.
And Geno Smith by the Giants, who's going to be sitting on the bench.
And should I also mention one, Josh Johnson? The same Josh Johnson who basically got himself kicked out of the Buccaneers, rather, because of insubordination.
Well, you know what? Let's go to some of the other news that we've seen around the league this past week. Brandon Albert just retired after 9 years in the league. He was actually supposed to be on the left side of the line for the Miami Dolphins. Remember the deal that the Dolphins made? The Jaguars traded their tight end Julius Thomas to the Dolphins, and the Dolphins sent Brandon Albert to the Jaguars. Brandon Albert, of course, only had a few times in training camp, but he's not going to be playing this year. In fact, because of this, Jacksonville will get the 2018 7th-round draft pick back that they sent to Miami. Mm-hmm. So at least, you know what? They didn't lose out on something because of this. We're also hearing a lot of injury news with the Ravens. This year, Kenneth Dixon tore his ACL. He's done for the year. 2 retirements this past year. John Urschel and Zach Orr, their linebacker, retired.
John Urschel's retirement is interesting because, for one, now that he's retired, he's going to go back to school to try and get his master's. And number 2, he admitted that CTE played a role in his decision to retire.
And we heard the big CTE study that came out that's really scaring a lot of players now into almost wanting to retire. How about Rob Ninkovich? He retired after his faithful years of service with the New England Patriots. In fact, helping the Patriots win 2 out of the last 3 Super Bowls.
Speaking of which, I see that you're wearing the Jets jersey. Did you hear about the comments that Jamal Adams made about CTE, saying that he would be willing to die on the field just because he loves the game that much, and that rubbed a couple of people the wrong way.
Well, Jamal, I don't know if you'll really be feeling that way when you're almost on your deathbed and when your life ends like that. That's just a product of immaturity right there. He's a young kid. He doesn't realize what he's saying, but he'll think about it again. He'll, be at home and realize, what, maybe I shouldn't have made those comments because I didn't have the foresight or knowledge to realize that CT has caused a numerous amount of people in this league to die. And you remember the movie Concussion, about some of the players from the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yep. And as it turns out, he wound up drawing the wrath of Mike Webster. Well, correction. He wound up drawing the wrath of Justin Strelzik's widow, because Justin Strelzik, the former Steelers offensive lineman, he died because of numerous head injuries. And as it turns out, he was discovered to have CTE.
A lot of players, like I said, Mike Webster, a bunch of these players from the Steelers, too, that were featured in that movie about the doctor who came from Nigeria who actually brought about the discovery of this, and the league wanted to bury his studies. They didn't want to talk about it, but now it's being discussed. It's being studied even more, and we're finding out that there are more cases of this. Anyway, going to some other news, Tyreek Hill. Do you think he's going to have an explosive season for the Kansas City Chiefs this year?
He could if he were to stay healthy, though.
That's it. How about Cam Chancellor? He finally got a new contract extension with the Seahawks.
That's a big thing for the Seahawks. It's crucial that they keep their entire secondary intact, especially with the rumors of Richard Sherman being traded.
Ryan Clady, after so many years in the league, has decided to call it a day.
Mm-hmm. Ryan Clady most recently was with the Jets, but his best years were with the Broncos.
The Saints cut Orlando Franklin, the offensive line, after just 5 days with them, and now the Jets are hearing rumors of getting him. Julian Edelman and newly acquired cornerback of the New England Patriots, Stephon Gilmore, got into a little bit of a tussle at practice and were both thrown out this past Tuesday.
That's another thing you're going to hear about the Patriots. They will not tolerate any kind of confrontation between teammates.
Forrest Lamp, the rookie offensive lineman, unfortunately tore his ACL, so he's out for the rest of the season. And that brings a huge issue for the Chargers, which has plagued Phillip Rivers in the under center, is the fact that he has little, if any, protection. This guy suffers between 25 to 30 sacks each season. Mm-hmm. And you wonder why, he gets hurt so badly. Mm-hmm. So this is where, they're going to have to go dip into their pool of players that are remaining. Will Fuller just broke his collarbone with the Texans. The second-year player out of Notre Dame who had over 680 yards offensively, was a great speedy receiver to give to take the stress off of DeAndre Hopkins. Well, broke his collarbone, 2-3 months he needs to recover.
There you go.
And right now, with the Indianapolis Colts, speaking of quarterbacks who get sacked heavily and injured, but this time this is due to shoulder issues.
Yeah.
Andrew Luck, we don't know whether or not he's going to even be at training camp, when he's going to be able to play.
Well, they're already saying there's a strong possibility he might miss the first 6 games of the year. If that's true, that's only going to set the Colts even more back in the division than they already are. Because some are saying that the South Division is the Texans to win. And you could make the argument that entire division has gotten better. It's not just the Texans. The Jaguars, some are saying the Jaguars are going to be surprising some people now that they've got Leonard Fournette in the backfield. Maybe he'll take a lot of the pressure off of Blake Bortles. There's also Tennessee. Marcus Mariota grew by leaps and bounds last season. And you combine that with the two-headed running back monster that they have, who's to say the Titans are not going to challenge for the South Division title? The Colts are in serious trouble right now.
And the fact that Scott Tolzien is their starter right now at the moment on their depth chart, that's even more scary right there. For a guy who, even though, yes, he had a 66.4 completion percentage last year, but I'll be honest, this is a team that's gone 2 straight years at 8-8. They really, if things don't improve with this team, Chuck Pagano could see his job bye-bye this year. Like this from the NSYNC song, Bye, Bye, Bye. Well, that could be his career. Austin Howard just got a 3-year deal with the Ravens, considering back on July 28th. He was cut by the Oakland Raiders, a team he signed a 5-year deal with back in 2014 for $30 million. Well, he got a 3-year deal for $16 million with the Ravens, 5.5 in his first year, with team options in the remaining 2 years. And Jalen Collins, who played an integral part in the Falcons getting to Super Bowl 51 last year. In fact,
suspended for 10 games for taking PEDs.
Yeah, had 10 tackles last year, and unfortunately had the second suspension for this.
Mm-hmm.
And Malcolm Smith, unfortunately, had a pectoral injury, out for the year for the 49ers in that linebacking core. But the good thing, they still have, they got Reuben Foster, who's going to be a huge plus in that front seven, along with Solomon Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of good things to be grateful for. And now, as you know, we're heading into the first week of the preseason.
They're finally, technically the first week of the preseason was this past Thursday, but the first full week of games starts Wednesday.
You got the Texans and the Panthers on Wednesday. Thursday, you got Falcons, Dolphins, Vikings, Bills, Redskins, Ravens, Jaguars, Patriots, Saints, Browns, Eagles, Packers, Broncos, Bears.
And then on Friday rather, the Giants begin their season at home because they're playing the Steelers.
That's going to be a fun game to watch. The question is going to be for the Steelers, who will be the backup quarterback? That's the question they want answered because we don't know whether or not Ben is going to have another season. For the Giants,
what's going to happen with Sterling Shepard? That's going to be their main question because Sterling Shepard badly hurt his ankle over the weekend. There was some thought that maybe he broke his ankle entirely, but fortunately it was a high ankle sprain, so it's just a matter of how much time he's going to miss, whether he's going to miss maybe a couple of weeks of preseason, the entire preseason. Maybe they'll put him on the PUP list to start the year and then have Brandon Marshall and Odell Beckham Jr. be the starters.
I know, but the running back situation is questionable. Their offensive line, always questionable. But the defense, I don't have any question, especially the secondary that they have. Mm-hmm. For the Steelers, their secondary, that's a question mark, too, on top of who will be the backup.
There's another question in regards to the Giants. It's the running game. Who's going to be the every game running back for them? Is it going to be Paul Perkins? Is it going to be somebody else?
Or Wayne Gallman, possibly, that came out of Clemson.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you got Buccaneers-Bengals at 7:30, 49ers-Chiefs at 9.
And then this coming Saturday night, your Jets start their preseason, and they have the Titans, a team that is going to be someone to watch this coming season.
Oh, without a doubt. They are another team besides the Texans that are going to compete in the AFC South. In the additions that they made, especially on offense, getting Eric Decker to be with the likes of their running backs, Derrick Henry and DeMarco Murray, and of course, the defense too. When you got a guy like Jarrell Casey, who's been in the team for some time, the Jets, on the other hand, you just told me before we went on the air that Quincy Nua is done for the season.
Yeah, unfortunately, he suffered a really bad neck injury, so he's out for the entire year. Now, who are the Jets going to look to be their number one receiving threat?
It's going to have to be probably Jalen Marshall's going to have to step up, as well as the other kid that they got out of Ohio State. It's just, it's really, and you know what? Darius Stewart could step up too, who they got in the draft. And you got a guy like Jordan Leggett. We could finally have a true tight end for the Jets that we haven't seen in a long time, and finally get our first tight end touchdown in years. You got Cowboys, Rams, Raiders, Cardinals. Then on Sunday to end the first full week, Lions, Colts, and then Seahawks, Chargers. So it's a really good array of games, of course. It's always fun, but again, as I mentioned earlier, these are games merely as litmus tests for coaches to see who is talented enough and good enough to make their roster come September.
Yep. Now, let's quickly get into baseball for just a little bit because there was a real rude awakening that the Mets got this past weekend at home. And unfortunately, it came at the hands of the Dodgers. If you ever saw a contrast between the haves and the have-nots, this series was it. Not only did the Dodgers sweep the Mets 3 in a row, they outscored them 57-15, and supposedly they hit 25 home runs in the 7 games against the Mets.
And not only that, how about on Friday's game? They lose that game, unfortunately, and on top 6-0. That's how about the fact that Chris Taylor had a leadoff homer against Jacob deGrom,
And then Saturday, the Mets get 3 home runs in the first inning and still lose.
Yeah, Taylor, Turner, Seager, Bellinger, all's connected. And you know Justin Turner, the former Met who played for years on the team before he had developed the huge, incredible beard, but yet is a .340 hitter for this team. He's still a little burned out about the Mets letting him go.
Well, let me tell you, Justin Turner really was not given a fair shake by the Mets because, for one, he's an infielder. And when he was on the Mets, he was on the same infield that had David Wright and also
Jose Reyes, I believe.
Jose Reyes was there. He and Turner were teammates for about a year. But he's a third baseman. Justin Turner's a third baseman, and he plays the same position that David Wright does. Who knew that David Wright was going to have the debilitating back injury that he wound up suffering, which required a major surgery? And who saw Justin Turner be the contributor that he is right now with the Dodgers? Nobody can predict these things. It just so happens that Turner got himself a much better opportunity. And quite frankly, a lot of people are blaming Terry Collins and Sandy Alderson for just letting him go. These guys are not mind readers. They could not see what was going to be happening in the future. It just so happens that Turner's got a really good thing going in Los Angeles, and he's become an all-star.
And he leads the National League with a .349 average. But yeah, I think because of how upset he was with the Mets, it sort of motivates him to even get better, and he has. They have an embarrassment of riches on this team. Let's not forget, in the last 51 games now, they're 44-7 in the last 51 games. They are on track to possibly break the all-time single-season record for most wins.
116 wins is the record, which is held by the Seattle Mariners, the 2001 Seattle Mariners. And also I wanted to mention, Daniel Murphy was also on that same infield with David Wright. Justin Turner was basically caught in no man's land. There was no way that Turner was going to be able to get a fair shake with the Mets in the early days.
Speaking of the crosstown rivals, speaking of New York, the Yankees this past week also had a bit of a terrible week, but at least they had one more win. 3.
At least they saved face a little bit by splitting a 4-game series with the Indians. An Indian squad that Joe Girardi called a very, very good team. You look at them from top to bottom. They've got hitting. They've got good defenders in the outfield. They've got tremendous pitching.
You got to thank Abraham Almonte yesterday for the dumbest error that any person could commit. The fact that he jumped on a ball that he wasn't even near the wall in right field, and all of a sudden his error turns into a 3-run triple by Jacoby Ellsbury.
Let's see if this actually jumpstarts Jacoby Ellsbury for the rest of the season, because he was in the worst slump since he came back from the disabled list after that concussion. Let's see if that'll help him a little bit. There's also the matter of the pitching staff. The last couple of games, the Yankees have gotten really good pitching from Jordan Montgomery, who, by the way, got demoted to the minors, and Luis Severino, who has now emerged as the ace of that staff. You think about it. The Yankees at one time were 6 deep in their starting rotation. It was Montgomery, who's now back at Scranton. There's CC Sabathia. There's Masahiro Tanaka, Luis Severino, and also
now we have Yanni.
Sonny Gray and Jaime Garcia. Yeah. Sonny Gray, quite frankly, deserved better in his first start. But the Yankee defense embarrassed themselves in his first start with the Yankees this past Thursday.
The 3 errors they gave up in that first inning set the bad precedent for Game 1 against Cleveland, and they lost 5-1.
And then Jaime Garcia wound up making his first start as a Yankee, and he did not distinguish himself so much either.
unfortunately for the both of them. But I think this coming week, if you look at they're off today, just like the Mets, but they got. They're going to be in Toronto tomorrow to Thursday, and they come back home this weekend to play the Red Sox in a pivotal series.
Yeah, and the Yankees are calling this rivalry week because after the Blue Jay series, the Yankees have, 10 games? No, 6 games with the Red Sox, sandwiched around 4 games with the Mets,
which is really
in a 2-stadium 4-game series.
And it's always going to be fun. It's going to be, and especially I think coming up or later this month, they're going to have Star Wars night and Darth Vader.
Yep,
well,
this Saturday night is going to be Star Wars night at Yankee Stadium, and they're going to be having Star Wars characters make their way onto the field.
Well, I always knew they were the dark side of the Force. I'm kidding. I'm so joking.
Well, why do you think the Yankees are always playing the theme from Star Wars whenever they introduce the opponent's lineup during the pregame introductions?
I know. Every time they're dun, 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 dun. And speaking of the baby Yankees, the Staten Island Yankees had a 4-game skid this past week. They fell for the first time in the entire in the McNamara division out of first place and got replaced by the Aberdeen Ironbirds. In fact, they lost 3 straight to them this past week on really bad errors and hits that they gave up. Now they're in Connecticut tonight. They got Williamsport tomorrow and Wednesday and Thursday, and then they head to Mahoning Valley this coming weekend. So hopefully they'll be able to repair the damage from last week. At least they were able to win on Sunday. And by the way, this past Saturday at the ballpark, they had GFW Wrestling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
GFW, if I'm not mistaken, is the former TNA, correct?
That's right. And who made his debut? John Morrison made his GFD debut in Staten Island and actually won in a 6-person tag team match.
And he's the latest former WWE superstar to make his way over to GFW. There's him, there's Bobby Lashley, there's Alberto Patron, the former Alberto Del Rio.
But he's on suspension still pending the inquiry with what happened with Paige. And but yeah, he's still with the company. But Cody Rhodes actually is not with the company anymore. He actually signed a deal. He's no longer with GFW.
If I'm not mistaken, I think he went over to the Ring of Honor, didn't he?
I believe so. Or
yeah, I think Cody Rhodes is with the Ring of Honor now. It's good to see these guys still able to extend their wrestling career, so to speak, even if it's not with the big company anymore.
Here's some short information. Doc Rivers no longer in his front office job with the Los Angeles Clippers.
Could it be that maybe we'll see a changing of the guard, not just in the front office, but on the sidelines too?
I don't know. Right now, they're in the post CP3 era, so it's remain to seen with all these 7 new players. Vasil Lomachenko defeated Manuel Mariaga in a 7th-round TKO knockout. This coming Usain Bolt lost in his final 100-meter race to Justin Gatlin.
Yeah, not disappointing ending for Bolt, but he had probably the most outstanding career that any 100-meter racer could ever have.
Without a doubt. Hideki Matsuyama won the Bridgestone Invitational. Chris Stroud won the Barracuda Championship in the PGA Tour. Martin Truex won the Watkins Glen International Race in the Monster Energy Cup Series. 4 left before the postseason begins for NASCAR. The PGA Championship, the final major of the PGA Tour season for the Wanamaker Trophy, begins on Thursday. Will Jordan Spieth become the youngest person to have a career Grand Slam after winning the British Open in July?
And Major League Soccer had their All-Star game, and the All-Star team wound up playing Real Madrid. Game finished in a 1-1 tie. And here's another note. Happy trails to Vladimir Klitschko because he wound up retiring.
I know, one of the greatest heavyweights of all time, believe me.
Yeah, unfortunately, some sad news to report. 2 former major leaguers wound up passing away. Darren Daulton died of cancer at 55, and Don Baylor died at 67. He wound up battling cancer on and off for quite a few years, and Ara Parsegian died as well.
At 94, the legendary Notre Dame head coach who led them to the 1966 and 73 championships. In fact, he was with a team that unfortunately didn't have a winning record in 5 seasons, and yet he was 9-1 his first season, 95-17-4 in his 11 seasons with 2 national titles, and a great color commentarian for CBS.
Folks, thanks once again to you guys for watching at home, and thanks again to Roman on the other side of the glass.
Thank you, Roman.
So for everyone here, I'm Jamie.
I'm Eric.
Good night, everyone.
Peace, Staten Island, and be kind to